Up to now, the stories I've shared with you were born from ancient pacts, from whispered legends and fears hidden in the folds of folklore. These were secrets guarded by communities, by families, by traditions. But there's another kind of secret, a more modern, colder, and perhaps more relentless type, the corporate secret. Large industries, in their incessant search for resources, dig deeper than any explorer, map territories no government knows, and sometimes they find things that weren't on geological maps, anomalies that defy science and common sense. And when that happens, the protocol isn't superstition or prayer. It's a confidentiality agreement, a mass dismissal, a fabricated bankruptcy, silence bought with money and fear. The summer camp. For many, it's a rite of passage, a place of first friends, first loves, first lessons in independence. It's a world apart, governed by its own rules, its own traditions, and most importantly, its own legends. Every campfire is a stage for horror stories. The hook-handed maniac, the lake ghost, the haunting of Cabin 13. We tell these stories to feel a safe shiver, a controlled fear, because we know that, at the end of the night, we'll return to the safety of our tents, and at dawn, the monsters will disappear with the mist. But what happens when the night doesn't end? What happens when the sun rises and the monsters are still there? And what happens when you discover that the legend told around the campfire is just a smokescreen for a much more real and hungry horror? Good evening or good morning. I am the Unseen Archivist. Today's story is the reconstruction of one night. A single night of chaos, blood, and revelations at an isolated summer camp in the Scottish borders. It's the case of the Blackwell Quarry camp, and how a group of young counselors who just wanted one last night of partying found themselves in the middle of a war that wasn't theirs. A war between hunters and prey, where, throughout the night, the roles reversed in terrible ways. This is a story that asks us, which legends are told to scare and which are told to warn? And before we light our campfire, if you also have a camp story that still sends shivers down your spine, leave your light to share the experience. And if you want a reserved spot at this campfire to hear the darkest cases, subscribe to the Unseen Archivist channel and hit the bell. The night is long and full of dangers, and your company is our only protection. Let's set up the tent. The Blackwell Quarry Camp was a summer retreat for the children of the southeastern elite, located in the heart of the Scottish borders. Isolated, surrounded by dense forest and a dark water lake formed in an old quarry. The owner was Arthur Blackwell, an enigmatic and overprotective man. Our story takes place on the last day of the season. The children have already left. Only the young counselors, aged 18 and 19, remain to tidy up the place before returning to their city lives. But the young people's plans are different. They want one last night of partying, a campfire, music, drinks, and goodbyes. And Sam, one of the counselors, in love with his colleague Chloe, decides to take matters into his own hands. In an act of youthful sabotage, he damages the camp van's engine, the only means of transport off the mountain. When the group gathers to leave, the van won't start. They are trapped. Arthur Blackwell, when informed by phone, panics. He screams, begs them to lock themselves in the main lodge and not to leave for anything until he can return with help. The next day, the young people, of course, don't take him seriously. For them, it's a sign of destiny. An extra night of freedom and partying, without rules and without supervision. They ignore the warnings. The sun sets. The full moon, huge and white, rises from behind the mountain. The campfire is lit. The music begins. The last night at Blackwell Quarry had begun. They didn't know that. For some, it would be the last night of their lives. The reconstruction of the events of that night is a puzzle, assembled from the conflicting and traumatized testimonies of the survivors. The party was in full swing. Laughter, loud music, teenage romance. And then the first scream. It came from the forest near the lake. Ben and Olivia, who had strayed from the group, were attacked. According to Olivia's testimony, a huge, hairy, and fast thing emerged from the darkness. She describes being dragged into the woods, while Ben screamed in pain. She managed to escape, but saw the creature bite Ben's neck before dragging him into the trees. Panic sets in. The group, now alert and terrified, disperses. They don't know what attacked them. A bear? A cougar? Paranoia begins to corrode the group. From then on, the night becomes a series of violent encounters and life or death decisions. The narrative I managed to assemble is chaotic. Lucas, the group's nerd, and Hannah, the most pragmatic, lock themselves in the camp's radio station, trying to call for help. They hear the creatures outside, scratching the walls, testing the windows. Sam, feeling guilty for the sabotage, tries to be the hero and ends up being hunted around the lake. Chloe, the influencer, finds herself alone in the forest and needs to use her wits to outsmart the creatures and get back to the main lodge. What the testimonies make clear is that the creatures were not ordinary animals. They were intelligent. They seemed to hunt for sport, playing with their prey, appearing and disappearing in the shadows. And there was more than one. The group was being hunted by a pack. The entire night became a deadly game of hide and seek. Every creak of a branch, every moving shadow, was a peak of terror. The young people, who hours earlier were only concerned with their summer dramas, now only cared about seeing the sunrise. While the chaos unfolded, a question hung in the air. What were those creatures? My investigation led me, at first, to the local legend. The story the counselors themselves told to scare the children around the campfire. The legend of Eleanor, the Lady of the Woods. The story, which I researched in newspaper archives from the neighboring town, says that in the 1950s, a small circus of oddities traveled through the region. The main attraction was a psychic and healer named Eleanor. One day, during an argument with the circus owner, one of the wagons caught fire. The fire spread and destroyed the entire circus, killing Eleanor and several other members. The legend says that Eleanor's spirit, furious, became trapped in the forest where the tragedy occurred, the same forest as Blackwell Camp, and that, on full moon nights, she roams the woods, and the beasts of the forest, the wild animals, become her servants, attacking anyone who invades her territory. Her cries and lamentations, the legend says, can still be heard on the wind. The young people, in their panic, clung to this story. They believed they were being hunted by the ghost of a vengeful woman and her pack of animals. Some of the survivors swore they saw a pale female figure watching them from afar in the middle of the woods. It was a supernatural explanation for a horror they couldn't understand. And for a while, in my own investigation, I also believed that this was the key. But the truth, as always, was more complex. The Lady of the Woods was real in a way, but she wasn't the huntress. She was the first victim. The key to the truth was not in the legend, but in the family that owned the legend, the Blackwell family. The revelation came from the testimony of Phoebe, one of the counselors, and her forced interaction with the town's chief inspector, George Blackwell, Arthur's uncle. Here begins what's truly scary. Phoebe and her boyfriend Leo were attacked early in the night. Phoebe was captured by the chief inspector, who locked her in the police station's basement for her own protection. It was there that she heard the confession, the story of the curse. The creatures were not animals controlled by a ghost. They were werewolves, and the curse was in the Blackwell family's blood. According to the chief inspector's confession, the circus fire really happened, but the story was different. Eleanor's son, Silas, survived the fire, but was bitten by one of the beasts from the circus cage, a creature no one knew what it was, and he became the first, the white werewolf. Years later, Arthur Blackwell's children, Liam and Amelia, were attacked and bitten by Silas during a full moon night, and the curse spread through the family. Blackwell Camp was not a business. It was a prison. A golden cage where Arthur kept his children locked and isolated from the world during full moons, so they wouldn't hurt anyone. His desperate warning for the counselors to leave was not out of concern for their safety from external dangers. It was out of fear of the danger that was locked in the basement of the lodge. Sam's prank, the broken van, the decision to have one last party, it was the perfect storm. The young people, loose around the camp, and Arthur's children, transformed into monsters by the full moon, breaking free from their captivity. The hunt was not of strangers, it was of family. And the counselors were caught in the crossfire. The night, then, changed its objective. It was no longer about surviving the creatures. It was about surviving long enough to hunt Silas, the original white werewolf, because, according to legend, killing the alpha would break the curse on everyone he bit. The night ended in a climax of blood and fire at the old Blackwell mansion near the camp. The survivors, now aware of the truth, allied with some family members to hunt Silas and end the curse. I won't go into details of who survived and who didn't. The reports are confused and the testimonies traumatizing. What is known is that, at dawn, the main lodge was in flames. Several of the creatures were dead, and the curse, perhaps, was broken. The official police story, controlled by Chief Inspector Blackwell, was simple: unidentified wild animal attack. The case was closed, and the Blackwell family sold the property. The Blackwell Quarry Camp no longer exists. But the story leaves us with a disturbing reflection on secrets. The curse that haunted Frost Hill was not just lycanthropy, it was silence. The pact of a family to hide its monstrosity. A pact that, in the end, caused an even greater tragedy than the one they were trying to avoid. And that makes me ask you, which monster is more dangerous? The one with claws and teeth that hunts you in the darkness? Or the one that hides behind a smile, behind a locked door, behind a family secret? How many tragedies in our world could be avoided if truths, however monstrous, were brought to light? Leave your opinions in the comments. I believe that the discussion about the nature of monsters, both outside and inside, is essential. If this case reconstruction left you on the edge of your seat, subscribe to the Unseen Archivist channel and hit the bell. We are just at the beginning of our season of analyzing great horror narratives. And our next investigation will take us to a world where silence is not a choice, but the only rule for survival. A world where the smallest sound can mean your death. We will analyze the events that followed the arrival of the creatures that hunt by sound.